What if America banned European officials for fighting online hate speech? That happened yesterday, and the justification reveals everything about free speech versus diplomatic reality. Before we dive into this transatlantic censorship crisis, hit that like button and subscribe for analysis that cuts through diplomatic doublespeak. December 24th, State Department headquarters. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced visa bans against 5 Europeans, accusing them of extraterritorial censorship against American platforms. The banned individuals include former EU Commissioner Thierry Breton, the architect of Europe's Digital Services Act. But here's what makes this diplomatic escalation more dangerous than standard policy disagreements. This isn't about protecting free speech. It's about protecting specific speech from specific consequences. And the precedent it sets threatens the entire framework of international cooperation. The 5 Europeans targeted by Rubio represent different aspects of European digital governance. Thierry Breton crafted the EU's Digital Services Act. Imran Ahmed runs the Center for Countering Digital Hate. Claire Melford leads the Global Disinformation Index. Their shared crime, according to Rubio, pressuring American tech companies to moderate content more aggressively. But the reality is more complex than Rubio's narrative suggests. The Digital Services Act doesn't target American viewpoints specifically. It requires major platforms to remove illegal content, provide transparency about moderation decisions, and give researchers access to study harmful content patterns. The law applies equally to European and American users. It targets genuinely illegal content like child exploitation, terrorist recruitment, and harassment campaigns. Yet Rubio characterizes this as organized efforts to coerce American platforms to punish American viewpoints they oppose. This framing reveals the core tension. What Europe calls content moderation, America calls censorship. What Europe sees as platform accountability, America views as ideological suppression. The visa bans represent an escalation in this philosophical divide. Instead of diplomatic dialogue, the Trump administration chose immigration punishment. Sarah Rogers, Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy, called Breton the mastermind of digital regulation, as if creating consumer protection laws was criminal conspiracy. The European response was swift and unified. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot condemned the restrictions. EU officials threatened swift and decisive responses to what they called unjustified measures. This diplomatic crisis emerged from a fundamental misunderstanding of how content moderation actually works. European regulations don't dictate specific moderation decisions. They require platforms to establish clear policies, apply them consistently, and provide appeal mechanisms for users who disagree with decisions. American platforms retain complete control over their content policies. They can choose to operate differently in Europe and America if they prefer different regulatory approaches, but that nuance gets lost in political rhetoric about censorship and sovereignty. The deeper issue involves competing visions of platform responsibility. Europe believes large tech companies have quasi-governmental power over public discourse and should face corresponding accountability requirements. America traditionally favors minimal platform regulation, allowing companies to moderate content based on business considerations rather than democratic oversight. These philosophical differences create practical tensions when platforms operate globally across different regulatory systems. The visa bans escalate these tensions into personal diplomatic retaliation against individuals who crafted European policy through democratic processes. Breton responded to his ban by noting that all 27 EU member states voted for the Digital Services Act in 2022. This wasn't unilateral censorship, but collective democratic governance. The Trump administration's characterization of democratic European policymaking as radical activism and weaponized NGOs reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of European institutional processes, or worse, a deliberate mischaracterization designed to justify diplomatic aggression against allied nations. The timing of these bans is significant. They come as the Trump administration faces its own content moderation controversies, including the CBS 60 Minutes censorship scandal and broader complaints about media coverage. Attacking European content moderation efforts provides convenient deflection from domestic press freedom concerns. The irony is profound. An administration complaining about European censorship just implemented its own form of censorship by banning individuals for their policy positions. The visa restrictions represent prior restraint on speech, punishing people for advocating positions the Trump administration opposes. This creates dangerous precedent for international relations. If policy disagreements become grounds for diplomatic retaliation, cooperation on global challenges becomes impossible. The targeted individuals work on genuine problems. Online harassment, disinformation campaigns, and platform manipulation threaten democratic discourse worldwide. Dismissing these efforts as radical activism ignores the real harms that unmoderated platforms can enable, from election interference to terrorist recruitment to coordinated harassment campaigns. The economic implications extend beyond diplomatic relations. American tech companies operate globally and must navigate different regulatory requirements worldwide. Creating adversarial relationships with European regulators complicates compliance efforts and increases business uncertainty. The Digital Services Act applies to platforms with over 45 million European users. American companies like Meta, Google, and X must comply regardless of diplomatic tensions. Visa bans against European officials won't change these business realities. They'll just make cooperation more difficult and compliance more expensive. The national security dimensions are equally troubling. Content moderation involves intelligence sharing about terrorist networks, foreign influence campaigns, and other security threats. Antagonizing European partners who provide crucial intelligence cooperation for short-term political messaging undermines long-term security interests. The precedent extends beyond content regulation. If America bans foreign officials for policies it opposes, other nations will respond similarly. American officials involved in sanctions, trade restrictions, or military deployments could face reciprocal travel restrictions from countries that disagree with those policies. This diplomatic escalation spiral benefits no one and complicates essential international cooperation on everything from climate change to pandemic response. The First Amendment implications are also complex. The Trump administration claims to defend American free speech by attacking European speech regulation, but the visa bans themselves restrict speech by punishing individuals for their advocacy positions on digital governance. The administration's definition of protected speech appears to exclude European voices advocating for platform accountability. This selective application of free speech principles undermines the universal values the administration claims to defend. The tech industry response will be crucial. American platforms must continue operating in Europe regardless of diplomatic tensions. They need working relationships with European regulators to ensure compliance and resolve disputes. Visa bans complicate these essential business relationships. The long-term consequences extend far beyond current political tensions. International cooperation on digital governance requires mutual respect and dialogue between democratic partners. The Trump administration's approach substitutes confrontation for cooperation, making global solutions to digital challenges less likely. European regulations aren't perfect. The Digital Services Act creates compliance burdens and leaves room for inconsistent enforcement. But the appropriate response involves diplomatic engagement and technical cooperation, not personal retaliation against European officials. The visa bans represent a failure of diplomatic imagination. Instead of working with European partners to develop compatible approaches to digital governance, the administration chose punishment and escalation. This approach damages American interests more than European ones. Europe will continue regulating digital platforms with or without American cooperation. But without cooperation, American companies face higher compliance costs and American officials lose influence over global digital governance discussions. The irony is that many European content moderation efforts align with American interests. Removing terrorist content, preventing foreign election interference, and protecting children from exploitation serve shared democratic values. The Trump administration's reflexive opposition to any content moderation undermines efforts to address these legitimate concerns through international cooperation. The historical context makes this diplomatic escalation even more troubling. America and Europe have cooperated on digital issues for decades, from internet governance to cybersecurity initiatives. The visa bans represent a sharp departure from this collaborative approach, replacing partnership with punishment over policy disagreements. The targeted individuals aren't fringe activists or authoritarian censors. They're mainstream policymakers working within democratic institutions to address genuine social problems. Thierry Breton served as EU Commissioner with explicit mandate from European voters. His work reflects democratic will, not radical ideology. The Trump administration's characterization of these individuals as radical activists reveals either fundamental ignorance of their actual work or deliberate misrepresentation for political purposes. The broader context involves America's declining influence in global digital governance. While the Trump administration fights democratic allies, authoritarian nations advance their own digital governance models. China promotes digital sovereignty that justifies comprehensive internet censorship. Russia advocates for information controls that eliminate independent journalism. These authoritarian approaches pose genuine threats to global internet freedom. Yet the Trump administration spends diplomatic capital fighting European efforts to make platforms more transparent. This misplaced priority undermines American leadership while strengthening authoritarian alternatives to democratic digital governance. The economic implications extend beyond diplomatic relations. The global digital economy requires international cooperation on everything from data flows to cybersecurity standards. American tech companies need European market access, and European companies need American platforms. This economic interdependence requires regulatory cooperation, not diplomatic conflict. The constitutional implications are equally complex. The First Amendment protects robust debate about policy questions, including content moderation approaches, but the visa bans punish foreign officials for participating in democratic discourse about platform governance. If America can ban European officials for advocating content moderation policies, other nations can ban American officials for advocating free market approaches. The intelligence cooperation dimension adds another layer of concern. European officials targeted by visa bans often coordinate with American agencies on counterterrorism investigations. Content moderation involves identifying terrorist networks, foreign disinformation campaigns, and other security threats that target both American and European audiences. The tech industry response will determine how much damage these diplomatic tensions create for American business interests. American platforms must continue operating in Europe regardless of political disagreements. They need constructive relationships with European regulators. Visa bans against European officials complicate these essential business relationships and increase regulatory uncertainty. The long-term reputational costs may exceed any short-term political benefits. America's soft power depends on its commitment to international cooperation and democratic values. Digital governance challenges require international cooperation among democratic nations. Climate disinformation, pandemic misinformation, and authoritarian propaganda campaigns operate across borders. The visa bans make such coordination more difficult, ultimately harming shared democratic interests. Sometimes the greatest threat to free speech isn't foreign regulation, but domestic political calculations that prioritize messaging over meaningful engagement with complex global challenges. The visa bans against European officials represent politics over policy, confrontation over cooperation, and messaging over meaningful progress on digital governance. They damage American interests while providing minimal political benefits and set dangerous precedents for international diplomatic relations. When political theater trumps diplomatic wisdom, everyone loses. If this analysis showed you how diplomatic retaliation undermines American interests, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell, because understanding the difference between principled opposition and political theater matters more than temporary messaging advantages. See you in the next one.